Hello and welcome to our 9th session of Connecting Ports, a platform dedicated to discussing key issues and trends shaping the global port industry. I'm Christina Prieser, Associate Partner and Transport Economist at HPC Hamburg Port Consultant, and I'm excited to guide today's discussion. As always, our motto is debating what matters, so let's dive into the discussions that make a difference to our industry. We want to hear from you, so please share your thoughts, questions and ideas via the chat. Today's topic is something that can affect all of us. Let's get started together. We are focusing on the vital topic of cybersecurity in the port industry, a challenge that affects every aspect of global trade and operations and can create snowball effects around the globe. From protecting critical infrastructure to securing data flows, we'll explore how ports can navigate these uncharted waters and safeguard their future. So let's get started by introducing our 3 insightful speakers ready to explore this topic today. We are very happy to welcome Pradeep Luthria, joining from the United Arab Emirates, who is Senior Partner at Saiber Innovation Technology and a former Senior Information Tech Manager with DP World. So with extensive expertise in digital transformation and cybersecurity, Pradeep has been a key player in driving innovation in the terminal sector. Pradeep, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Next up, we are thrilled to have Scott Dickerson, founder of CISO LLC and former Global Cybersecurity Ambassador for CMR-CGM, who is attending from the United States. Scott brings a wealth of experience in shaping cybersecurity strategies across the maritime industry with a proven track record of enhancing security frameworks on a global scale. Very warm welcome, Scott.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to be here today.
Wrapping up our introductions, we are delighted to welcome Gadi Benmoshe, joining us from Israel, and he is a Managing Director of Marinnovators and Vice Chair of the Data Collaboration Committee at the International Association of Ports and Harbors. Gadi is at the forefront of driving innovation and data collaboration in the maritime sector, leveraging his expertise to connect technology with strategic growth. So thank you for being here today, Gadi.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Before we enter in our discussion, we have prepared a brief video that sets the scene of today's topic. So let's take a look. The video really highlighted the key challenges ahead. To kick off our discussion, I'd like to start with a question to Scott. So, what are you most concerned about when it comes to cyber disruption in the global port industry and their role within the maritime supply chain?
Thank you, Christina. I think one of the most concerning aspects to me of keeping our global supply chain resilient to cyber disruptions is the fact that national governments continue to put a lot of the onus primarily on individual, local, public, and private sector stakeholders. Nation state and transnational criminal threat actors are obviously a very real concern across our industry. And I think it's unrealistic to believe that the supply chain will not suffer disruptions if we continue using our current counteroffensive model and rely primarily on each local port authority and entity to defend itself against these global threat actors. In my opinion, we might be focusing too much and too many resources on regulatory efforts and not enough on countering the threat actors, which I think is unfortunately going to result in more port disruptions over the coming years.
Thank you very much, Scott, for the setting the scene in this regard. Now, for Pradeep, what do you see as the most critical issues terminals facing currently to be cyber resilient?
Actually, the problem is that there's not enough attention. I think Scott hit the nail on the head. It's more of a regulatory compliance topic, and it is a tick box exercise. People are not realizing that we have a very serious issue at hand, and the bad guys have more resources and better capabilities than we have. That's one thing. And the second thing is we don't share enough. We don't communicate enough about our incidents. There tends to be a whale that drops over an incident, and you really can't come out with the root cause. If we could get to the root causes and share those root causes faster amongst ourselves, we'd be better prepared. So, it's not just about the terminal. Just recently, there was an attack in SeaTac, which is, Scott would have read about that in the US, of course, where the authority that manages both the port and the airport, they had a number of days of downtime. And of course, there's no official statement on the root cause, but there's a lot of speculation of people who are close to it. And it does look like a very major cyber incident has taken place. So the problem is not sharing enough and not giving it enough importance, for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Pradeep. This is certainly a very important aspects which we need to consider. Gadi, you have been in the industry for many years and experiencing several cyber attacks and observing stakeholder reactions. So what recurring challenge or issue do you find most frustrating, one that seems to persist despite repeated efforts to address it?
Thank you, Christina, for this question. And I think that the issue that frustrates me the most in this regard is the lack of as I was quoted, the lack of understanding that preparedness to handle cyber attack, and it's not only an IT issue. The various, and I agree with my distinguished colleagues that the collaboration is needed, but collaboration starts inside the pod. And the various divisions in the pod still believe today that when a cyber attack will occur, they will just wait for the IT to handle it. I can quote, I can share with you from a cyber threat that I did in a big pod in the US that one of the stakeholders said in the pod that we have a great IT team and with something will happen, so they will take the backups and they will recover in no time. But we know that, and it's not in no time, it can be even weeks, and we saw it happen. So when it's such a cyber crisis, all the divisions have to be prepared for that case, and to do predefined decisions and to collaborate with other stakeholders like customs, but everything shall be predefined. And it doesn't happen today. Today, the pod needs a coordinated contingency plan that involves all the divisions. But I believe that tabletop exercise is one of the ways to understand what is needed to change in what the perception is today.
Thank you very much, Gadi. And you put it already in the focus of today's discussion. So we will take this up during the course of the talk show. So let's now discuss the specific issues and highlight the first recent incidents, or as you already indicated, the challenge of discussing them, as the true extent of these incidents often remain unknown. So Pradeep, you just hinted to one of those. Pradeep, why do only a few incidents become public? Is there a lack of transparency, and how can we learn to improve without sharing knowledge?
So it all starts with there's just so many directions in which we need to improve. It's hard to prioritize. But as Gadi pointed out, that cyber safety is not a IT responsibility. It is everybody who operates a device, whether it's a computer or a smartphone or tablet or whatever she does. They need to be aware of certain safe etiquette, safe protocol in terms of how they manage the use of that device. And the Achilles heel of every system is actually the human being. You can put as much smart tech into things, but if people themselves are not going to be mindful, then nothing can change. So that's at one level. Then the other level is, there's a fear of investment, because this is not something that they can touch and feel. If there's an incident, then maybe they'll be interested to have a discussion. But if you try to have a big budget or a sufficient budget to be cyber resilient, and you're an employee in a big company, port company or whatever, logistics company, or for that matter, any kind of industry, why should we say that we are only in the ports we are feeling insecure? I would say the conversations, what if hackers got control of a passenger plane while it was midair and started demanding? I mean, the conversations that need to happen with the various agencies to handle such an incident, I don't think they're happening in the strength that those conversations should be happening. So we need to really sit down, first of all, pull our heads out of the sand and say, guys, we have a real problem. We're under-resourced. We don't have the budgets. We are fighting an uphill battle. It is more, it's more rewarding to be on the dark side than to be on the good side. And unfortunately, unless we wake up to that and start changing that, nothing is going to happen.
Thank you very much for those insights, Pradeep. So it's clear that transparency and knowledge sharing is a major hurdle. So, and now let's also get a closer look at the core issue of information sharing. So, Scott, what are the key barriers to enhanced threat intelligence sharing among organizations and sectors, and how can we overcome them to stay ahead of potential threats?
Thanks, Christina. I think two of the biggest barriers remain trust and resources. Maritime and public sector organizations can readily share actionable, timely, and relevant cyber threat information with each other through organizations like the Maritime Transportation System Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the MTS ISAC, or other similar organizations. ISACs and other national or non-governmental organizations can share that information far quicker most of the time than government agencies can, due to the number of hurdles and bureaucracy steps that a federal agency might need to go through, a national government might need to go through to clear that information before sharing. Quite often, the MTS ISAC and these other NGOs can share that information in a matter of minutes instead of weeks and potentially months later that we see from some of the government agencies. So I think if there's a trusted community that stakeholders are a part of, then that information sharing can happen quicker, but not everybody's part of that community. So how do we build that trust and build those resources across that community even further? And I think what that also does is once you have that trust and that information quickly, then we all have very limited resources. We don't have enough resources to go around. So then you can focus those limited resources to defend against the attack that is happening right now and needs the attention of the port authorities, the terminal operators, etc. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. So I saw our other two speakers nodding to what you were saying. So it's a common understanding. This is a major issue. So and great insights on the barriers we face. So it's clearly much to address here. And so we now want to turn our attention to another critical challenge in port security. And the question goes to Gadi. Which type of specific security measures are necessary to protect Internet of Things port equipment from cyber attacks, for example? And how can these measures be implemented effectively?
Thank you, Katarina, for this question. And, today, the number of IoT devices implemented in port, it's much lower than the OT devices, the legacy devices. And they are the ones that today are one of the main weakest links in the port cybersecurity. And this is one of the parts that today ports have to take attention and invest the resources to try and mitigate this gap in cybersecurity. I can mention two security measures that can support safeguarding the OT of a port and the IoT as well. The first involves various technologies that specifically today give cybersecurity protection to OT systems, like companies like EasySec that do OT, but there are many others. But also there are recovery solutions that today are in the market. Also Salvador Technologies is one of them. And this is one important that technology can help us to mitigate this gap in cybersecurity. But the second one, it's a more basic measure, and it's the separation of the physical network between the OT and the OT or IoT network to the administrative network. Today, in some of the ports, those two networks are together, and risk can infiltrate from one network to another. And to reduce this, it's important to invest, sometimes to do a physical separation or maybe a virtual separation, but some separation between those networks is very important to try and keep safe the operations and continuity of the operations in the port. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Gadi. So before we proceed, let's quickly check whether we have any interaction from the audience so far. And I see there is no question at the moment. So please, I'd like to encourage you to share your questions to us and the speakers, and take it as a big opportunity to engage with the experts and have your inquiries addressed. And if you don't know how to access the chat, you have to register, but then it's open and you see all the information flowing there here in parallel. And while I say that, I see we have the first question here. So Scott mentioned the need of building trust. Many ports in the world have a public port authority and many private port operators. Who should take the lead in creating this trust base, the public or the private sector? Scott, what do you think?
I would say it's not just one or the other. Ultimately people say, well, there needs to be a lead, but I think that needs to be joint between both the public and private sector sides. It's great when the Port Authority takes that lead, but if not, those terminal operators can also step up and play a lead role. in some of those efforts. So I think it needs to be combined between both sides. And we see that regularly happening in different ports around the world, where both the Port Authority and some of the major terminal operators are then collaborating more and more. I think there's still a ways to go, but we're seeing progress in that area.
Again, I see the other speakers nodding. Would you like to add something, Pradeep or Gadi?
If you look at the model of the port community system or the logistics, community systems that exist in order to make business transactions more convenient. If there's a large amount of data sharing there between the government, semi-government, and the private sectors, and we have a template to look at right there about how information can be shared when there's a benefit for it. The thing is to make people realize that there's a benefit, even though it seems intangible. If you have had a near-miss incident, or if you have had an experience that you were able to ward off, that you should be able to share with the community at large, similar to how we work together on these platforms. That would be an excellent way. I'm aware there are some like the CISO Alliance and other platforms that operate out of the UK where incidents are welcome to be reported, and you can even report them anonymously if you don't want to mention your employer's name or something. But the little veil of shame on sharing has to be moved away, and that is where the accountability and all that has to be built up, for sure.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. Gadi, anything to add, or are you?
Thank you. I would like to add, because following up what Pradeep said about the port community system, is totally right, that this is one round table with all the stakeholders. But in the end, you need some governance structure also for that. So it's important to take everybody around this table and then setting up the governance. And it can be, in Guatemala, the one that is now auditing the maritime single window, it's the customs. In other countries, it's the Port Authority. In other countries, it can be a private sector. But it's important to do it and to have governance to run it smoothly.
Absolutely right. Yes, fully agree on that one. So let's work together everywhere. Now let's shift our focus to an interesting perspective highlighted in a recent Harvard Business Review article, which is titled "Boards Are Having the Wrong Conversation About Cybersecurity." So the article argues that management often concentrates on emergency plans when they should be prioritizing preparedness and recovery. So we briefly started on that one, but can you elaborate a bit more what your view on that is, Scott?
I think that was a very interesting article, and it reminds me of a great fireside chat session I had with Miss Jan Tai, a retired U.S. Navy admiral who sits on multiple boards, public sector, publicly traded company boards. And we had that conversation back in 2021 before the SEC rules that the Harvard Business Review article really highlighted even were drafted and came about. And when we talked about that, I don't think much has really changed in the interim. I think there still remains a couple of key issues. One that was highlighted in the article is minimal time and interactions between the board and the person leading cyber risk, whether that's the CISO or a chief risk officer or somebody else with a similar kind of role or title. That's one big issue. And the other one then is the minimal board understanding of how they have fundamentally integrated technologies into the supply chain and how they're actually leveraging those technologies and carrying out their business, and what what the corresponding cyber risk management efforts need to be for those integrated technologies. And this goes back to what I think it was Gadi that was saying earlier, that hey, there's a lack of that understanding of senior leadership of these technologies, and I think it's an IT technology issue and not necessarily owning that risk at that top level. And I think the boards need to do that. And so regardless of what questions are asked or topics presented, if these issues are not resolved, then the board challenges are going to remain. We need to create the more time between the leads and the board, and we need to increase the understanding and competence of the board members themselves to understand how their organizations are leveraging technology in their operations.
Thank you very much, Scott. That's a compelling point about establishing a cybersecurity culture focused on preparedness and recovery rather than just emergency plans. So, but beyond strategy, there is another critical layer to address, and that's the role of management in owning cybersecurity. So technical challenges can be solved and we can automate defense more and more, but the issue is not solved by delegating the accountability to the IT department, as you just rightfully said. It needs a management accountability. And what do you think on that, Pradeep?
So let me put it this way. Cyber security is another kind of risk. And there are parties in the structure of management of the business that handle the risk element. So of course, what do? They go out and say, hey, we'll buy some insurance. Because, okay, we're assured by our internal team that they're doing all they can to keep the wolves at bay. But what if they don't? The real problem is that I don't think there's enough product out there to really protect companies to the extent that they could be damaged in their business ecosystem. If you look at just pure turnover, there's a company not far from where I'm sitting that has a revenue of $17 or $18 billion. And I can tell you that they don't have enough insurance to cover a fraction of that in the event that, there is a cyber attack. I'm talking about cyber risk insurance. And then there's also the fact that we are now in a different phase of the world where we're now in the era of continuous compliance rather than snapshot compliance. For example, you'd have an annual, inspection of a building. But these days with IoT and things like that, you have sensors that tell you the health of the building. And we're moving more into the kind of risk management where data is going to be driving it, right? More and more. And as we add more data, we're adding more risk. So we're in this cycle where if we don't take care of it properly, we're just going to create more problems for ourselves. So this is, to me, this keeps me up at night.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. Your insights on management accountability are very spot on and slightly frightening when I hear about the insurance cover or the lack of it. So it's evident that leadership plays a vital role also in cybersecurity. But this is not just about roles, it's also about diverse perspective. And cybersecurity, much like the port industry overall, remains male-dominated, with women comprising less than a third of the workforce in those 15 countries analyzed by the LinkedIn Economic Graph Research Institute. Gadi, do you believe it's crucial to integrate a stronger female perspective in cybersecurity, and how can this be achieved?
In my experience, diversity in a group, it's welcome, and it gives great outcomes. And again, also in IAPH, that we have from all over the world members in our expert group, together also with Scott from the US and from Europe, from Africa, and for other countries. It gives a wider view, and it's very important. At all, and in cybersecurity. It's important not only incorporating women, but it also incorporating young people with experienced people, and also men and women. So I believe that it's important, and yes, also my feeling is that it's not enough today, the incorporation of women in the cybersecurity in the port environment. I believe that to achieve more diversity, the ports shall do a number of actions, be active on that. In one end, they shall cooperate with the educational institutions and even try to support them financially to achieve a high percentage of women completing cybersecurity training programs. This is from one end, and also from the other end, maybe to partner with female leaders in the port cybersecurity industry to do a campaign to attract and to encourage women to join this sector. And by this, getting a more diverse, more opinions, and more point of view to handle one of our main challenge, it's to keep the operation of the port running. Back to you. Back to you. Back to you.
Thank you, Gadi. I'd like to open this up also to our other speakers. And what are your thoughts on what Gadi just shared? So Scott and Pradeep.
I'll go first. I noticed that you've only invited the three of us men here. So you probably did not have a prospect candidate to invite. And I think we have reached a stage in the world where we see women everywhere. They're leading companies, they're entrepreneurs, they're here in the UAE, there's a lot of empowerment. Many of my clients, they're actually led by. So I think this is a conversation that is good. What has to happen is that women need to feel that this is an industry where they can contribute to. And given that it comes from, stevedoring, sweaty, operations, not to say that women stand back and don't go shoulder to shoulder, but I think today there's so many options of career, more than ever before. There are roles that have been created which never existed, 30 years ago. So there's so much of choice of careers that to attract young people, forget just ladies or women, it is difficult to hire now for this sector. So whatever can be done should be done.
That there are a number of reasons why there's differences culturally around the world for levels of women in cybersecurity roles. But I kind of think back to the last few maritime cybersecurity summits that we've had, and we've had a number of keynotes that have been women, including Ms. Jantai, who I mentioned earlier, retired naval admiral. We had Ms. Beth Ann Rooney, port director for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We also had, at the time, the CISO for Carnival Cruise Lines was women. That's changed positions, but we've had key speakers from around the industry from that side. So they exist, they're there. Definitely in the, as Gadi knows, in the IAPH working group for cybersecurity, we have a number of women that are a part of that as well. And so there is that diversity. I think we need to continue to foster it and grow it, but it's something we need to work on. And it's as everybody also previously mentioned, it's not just male, female, it's also getting the younger generation engaged and in this industry that is kind of in some ways, aging out, if you will, in certain key positions. And so we need to make sure that next level of leadership is there for the next generation.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I agree. It's different types of working cultures need to collaborate, right? So this is not just diversity, male, female, as you said, but also age and different backgrounds. So mixing it up and each learning from each other, right? And so we hinted on that already. Scott, can you give us some best practices for creating a cybersecurity conscious culture among the port and terminal staff?
I think I go back to my previous kind of comments and say that the culture really needs to be driven from the top down, whether that's the CEO, the port director, board of director, board of commissioners, depending on the structure within the port authority and the port entities, then whoever's in that leadership role across the board, if they're not truly concerned about an area of risk, such as cyber, and don't really make sure that they've bought into that, then everybody else is going to pretty much be able to understand that and spot a fake emphasis, if you will. If they're saying, do this thing, but they're not necessarily paying attention to it and focusing on it themselves, the junior people will see that. They'll see through somebody who might just be paying lip service to it and not necessarily is fully bought into it. So I think it's got to start at the top. And then from there, I think, again, if cyber continues to be pushed out of the boardroom and out of the C-suite and be dealt with strictly by technical people, again, that's going to be a disservice to the organization, because that C-suite and that board, again, how we've seen the digitalization efforts across our industry, now we are highly integrated with our technologies from an IT, OT, and IoT perspective. So it's not just the technical people that need these systems, it's all across the business industry, port authority that needs that understanding and responsibility. And so we need to make sure that that culture change is happening by the people who actually own the risk, being the business or the operational teams, truly buying in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these insights, Scott. So establishing cybersecurity-aware culture is a strong foundation, especially in navigation and operational and compliance challenges. So, however, to truly stay ahead, organizations need to shift from simply reacting to threats to actively hunting for vulnerabilities. And Pradeep, how can organizations do an effective transition from reactive defense mechanism to proactive threat hunting to identify and address vulnerabilities before they are exploited?
So the first thing to do is to acknowledge that there's an enemy or a bunch of enemies who are out to get us. Because if that is not understood and in place, then you can't get budgets, you can't get the training you need. So the first thing is the awareness that there is a monster that has to be dealt with. I'll give you an example. I'm often invited to speak at events, shipping events and port events, and even some offshore energy events. And invariably what happens is these events are 2 or 3 days long. And, the organizer comes and whispers in my ear and says, I know you're at 3 o'clock on day 1, but can I push you to 4 o'clock on day 2? And because there's somebody who, he's bought a big sponsorship package and he needs to talk about his product. And then they push me to day 3 when half the people are gone. And there's really no interest. Everybody loves to put it out there that, cybersecurity is a big thing. It's there in every event. It's there in every forum. But their audience genuinely needs to know that this is something that's going to be beneficial for them to get involved with. And so the first thing is to break down this, I would say, this deadlock that we have, that we should be present in the board. Our concerns should be aired. We can share them in layman's language. We don't need everybody to understand tech or geek language. There's enough ways to communicate risk with examples and the like. And we really need that support right from top down. And otherwise, we're not going anywhere. So that would be my way to tackle it.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. So it's important to hear and to consider for everybody. I agree. Gadi, what are the major regulatory and compliance challenges that maritime operators face in enhancing their cyber resilience? And can you please give examples for existing regulations and standards governing cybersecurity in ports and supply chains?
Thank you. There are many regulations and many guidelines for cybersecurity in the maritime sector. Some experts and maybe here around the table may say that there are too many. And I can mention a few. That, of course, the IAPA cybersecurity guidelines for ports that was published, and Scott was one of the contributors to this great work. And related to what Pradeep said before, it was dedicated for the sea level. It wasn't, it was a very long document, but we tried to do it as not technical as possible and try to tackle mainly this, the sea level, to understand and also the board, that things that were mentioned here in this session. And it's very important. So this is something that we did a few years ago, but something that I can share with you, and I'm glad to share about the next steps that the IAPH is doing. Again, and I will be happy to hear the opinions around this table. Last year we submitted a proposal to IMO that mainly because of the maritime single window. Maritime single window became mandatory since the beginning of the year. And by being mandatory, it turns out that the maritime single window will be a critical information infrastructure. So we must ensure that the cybersecurity is high and we can it's operational all the time. So the thing is that when it's guidelines or recommendations, it's not enough in our opinion. So we propose to IMO to add to the FAR Convention paragraph requesting a mandatory requirement from member states to introduce mandatory legal framework that is aimed to safeguarding the cybersecurity of the maritime single window. The proposal, it was presented April this year. We got great response, and it was supported by more than 16 countries. And now we are working for the specific paragraph that will be approved in next FAR 49 in April next year. This is what I would like to share of the regulatory activity that we have in IAPH. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gadi. Adding on this. Sorry, Pradeep, you have
I'd like to add a point.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The IMO 2021 that came out, where there was a basic, common level of cyber risk understanding on board of every ship, and that the crew should be able to handle the simple task of identifying that, yes, there is a problem, etc. It has now turned mostly into a tick box compliance exercise. I have myself been on board vessels where I've asked people and they've just been given very rudimentary training. They don't really understand. The crews come from all over the world. They have different levels of English proficiency. And it's a challenge to make them understand each other as it is, let alone bring them a new skill on top of it. So I can see that that's an uphill slope that somebody has to look into and improve for sure.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, Pradeep, for adding this to that. And I have another aspect of compliance and their complexities. So, Scott, do you believe that the compliance process has become overly bureaucratic and detracting from effective risk management? And how effective are current compliance rules for liners, ports, and terminals? And what changes would you suggest to better prioritize risk management?
So I'll start off by saying compliance is always around addressing somebody else's interests and concerns, not necessarily the organization's. And so from a compliance perspective, it's a, as Pradeep mentioned, it might become then a check the box mentality because it isn't about your interests, it's about somebody else's interests. So you're dedicating these resources to meeting that need. So I think there's a natural cause and effect where then those compliance efforts that are out there then pull resources away from actual risk management activities. And that being said, if an organization is addressing cyber risks, they should be able to meet some of those compliance requirements. They might not meet all of them, but ultimately, if they are looking at the limited resources they have and then are having to pull resources away from true risk management activities to work on a compliance effort, they may actually be making the organization less resilient, more susceptible to threat actors, and that's a challenge for our supply chain. That's going to cause issues down the road. And so we need to be very careful with our compliance regimes, in my opinion, and make sure that we're not setting them up to say, okay, you must do all of these things, even if a risk is within the acceptable limits as defined by the organization. They know their organization, they know their architecture, they know the weaknesses, they know what needs attention. And to a certain degree, we need to trust that and say, okay, if you need to fully meet this compliance effort, you're going to have to take resources away from another area where you know you might have weaknesses, but isn't necessarily being looked at from a compliance or regulatory perspective. It isn't required. Then you still might want to look at that. I'll give a real quick example. For years and years in the U.S., there's been NIST 800-171, which deals with controlled unclassified information that a lot of ports and maritime stakeholders have to meet because they're doing business with the government. Well, in NIST 800-171 for years, there were no security controls around email and phishing, even though we know that is one of the primary threat vectors out there that threat actors will use to get their initial foothold. And so people would say, well, it's not a requirement, so do I invest more in that? Well, yes, that's actually an area where that's going to help you stay safe and secure and continue operations. So it's that misalignment between compliance and risk management that I think causes some challenges. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And just putting the head of the terminal operator on, Pradeep, what are the key challenges that terminals face in complying with these regulations?
Actually, they don't face any issue. We manage to comply always. We manage to get our certification renewed always. It is basically a classic, in most cases, where you are extending yourself to derive the fact that it's compliant. And the inspectors also who come along, the regulatory experts, they're willing to accept what we say in many of the cases. So I'm not reflecting on any one of the companies that I worked on, but I can tell you that it's more about getting it done and moving on, and then announcing that, hey, what, we've renewed one more year of ISO 27001 or whatever. It is skin deep. It is not going down to the organs that it should. And, you have today, the way the world is, what you call as critical infrastructure, and which is mission critical, and then you have essential infrastructure, and then you have back office infrastructure. Every area now, because of the need for data, it has become kind of mission critical. But that change isn't seen in the regulatory framework. So to me, it's just a tick box exercise.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. And so this is understanding the challenges of compliance is crucial. But collaboration is the key to truly enhancing cybersecurity. We mentioned that before on several aspects. So, and we also mentioned port community systems as one example of collaboration within ports or with different actors. So, is there anything else, Gadi? How can ports and terminals effectively collaborate with shipping companies, cybersecurity firms, and government agencies to enhance cybersecurity?
Okay, let me give you an example of Israel, in which I was the CIO of the Israel port, and I think that it relates to part of the thing that Scott and Pradeep said. For example, in Israel, there is a government agency that is called the Israeli National Cybersecurity Directorate that is the one that declares which are the national critical infrastructure systems. And they declared, of course, that the port and the port community system, it was the second one that was declared, is the national critical infrastructure. As a CIO at the beginning, I said, okay, again, somebody will tell me what to do. Okay, but tell you the truth, that when you look at in another angle, okay, you have somebody that maybe have strict cybersecurity requirements, but in the other end, they also give you the support by top cybersecurity experts. So it's a way, again, and flexibility is needed, and in this case, they have it. Because if you explain your needs and because you did the risk management, then it's acceptable to derive from the strict requirement that is written in their books. But the flexibility, and I agree with Scott and Pradeep about that, it's important. This national directorate is also encouraging the collaboration with cybersecurity enterprises and even startups, trying to encourage to do startups in cybersecurity in the maritime area. Also, they do a roundtable of both stakeholders. We talked before about who shall lead it. Okay, again, it's one of the roundtables that lead the cybersecurity and the meeting point for the port stakeholders, including the shipping companies, to coordinate the cyber resilience actions. So I believe that it's a good example that shall be implemented globally, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gadi, and thanks a lot for the discussion so far. So let's see if there are any questions from our audience left to you. And I see one here. So maybe the first one goes to Scott. How do cyber attacks on ports differ from those in other critical infrastructure sectors like energy or transportation, or is there a difference at all?
In some ways, they do not differ. We see some of the same attacks that other critical infrastructure sectors, essential services will see. But we also see threat actors who are specifically targeting maritime entities. So I'll say, as an example, from the MTS ISAC, we saw threat activity from a nation-state threat actor. And when I reached out and tried to speak with other ISACs and other industry representatives and people that are well in tune with what's going on from a cyber threat perspective, they said no other sector was seeing that activity. So in some cases, there are threat actors who are looking specifically at maritime because of the objectives that they have. And so there are times then when we see that targeted activity. Now, from an attack perspective, are we necessarily seeing different approaches, different tactics, techniques, and procedures? No, not really. There's multiple industries, as was asked in the question, energy and other sectors that will see attacks against operational technology, OT systems. They'll see attacks that leverage different TTPs, whether that's ransomware as a service or other commodity efforts. we're seeing those same ones. They might tailor the campaign against maritime, which we see regularly, where then somebody might send that phishing email to a vessel where they're impersonating port state control, for example. You're not necessarily going to see that in other industries. So they will tailor it because they've done the reconnaissance, they've done the homework of what is likely going to work for this sector. But at the end of the day, the malware might be commodity malware that other sectors are seeing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I have another question here, which goes to Pradeep. Which specific systems, for example, terminal operation system, automated cranes, are most vulnerable to cyber attacks in modern ports?
So I think as you look at a terminal, if you are an operations guy, you will look at your operational equipment, your assets, and say, my cranes. If you're the engineering guy, you look at all the assets. And of course, if you're the commercial guy, then of course you're going to look at the yard and the gates and say, I want my boxes out and my boxes in on time so that I meet all the contracts I have with people. But if you want to talk about what can really get impacted if it's attacked, definitely operations will have a dominoes effect. So if cranes are attacked and they can't function, then there'll be a backlog of vessels. The yard will congest up. The trucks coming in or going out will be delayed. And so there will be a tell-on effect. Since the root business of a terminal is to load, to discharge and load cargo, the assets that are actually involved directly in doing that are, in my opinion, critical assets. If that answers the question.
Thanks a lot, Pradeep. And in this line of questioning, the final question from the audience goes to Gadi. Recent news have highlighted that cybersecurity concerns with equipment from especially crane manufacturers, and with increasing automation, how can ports and terminals ensure that critical equipment is integrated into their systems securely without introducing additional cybersecurity risks? Is there a need for international standards in manufacturing to address these issues? And could the IMO play a role in defining such standards?
Okay, thank you for this question. And I would say my personal opinion, as we introduce a new software in any company or in a port, you need to do acceptance test. Part of the acceptance test are cybersecurity test, and it doesn't matter if it's a crane, a software, or any solution. It shall be integrated, and I think it's the best practice in everything. And I think that this is the way to handle it. I hope that it answers the question.
Thank you very much, Gadi. We are going to running out of time here and concluding our discussion. So to do that, I would like to ask our guests for their final thoughts on the future. Starting with Scott, which emerging cyber threats do you believe will pose the greatest challenges to port security in the next decade, and how should ports prepare for these threats?
Over the next decade, I think we are going to see a continued expansion in the number of transnational criminal actors and nation-state attacks, again, because governments have, to a certain extent, invited that behavior due to a lack of enforcement and counter-threat activity. So on top of it, we have the digitalization efforts that we've been talking about throughout this that are going on across the sector. And so we've got increasing amounts of IT, OT, and industrial Internet of Things, IoT devices that are being set up within our businesses and port environments. And that is going to mean that cyber attacks are going to be more effective against a broader spectrum of the community because there's a larger attack surface. And so then those automated attacks and attacks particularly against ships that may have previously been protected because of limited bandwidth at sea. Now we have Starlink and Inmarsat and other efforts bringing broadband to sea. There's going to be successful attacks there that by nature were unsuccessful in past years. So in that sense, I think we're going to also see more successful underway attacks. Now, what should we do about that? I think ports need to prepare for this by doing a few things. First, once again, as we've been talking about throughout the session today, the executive team, the board, they've got to be bought in. They've got to understand that this is fundamental to what they're doing from a business perspective and how the supply chain flows and moves in and out of ports. They have to understand that and really be bought in, that then there's a cyber risk management element that needs to be part of that. If we do that, then everything else will work more effectively and efficiently. Then you got to understand the port's risk landscape, which Gadi and Pradeep have also mentioned, needing to be able to understand that. And assuming you've done that, and then it's not necessarily different from other sectors in terms of NIST, ISO, CIS top 18 types of best practices, frameworks, controls, but then specifically for the maritime community. Okay, double check that your IT, OT, IoT architectures have limited that exposure to public internet to make sure that attack surface is decreased, and also make sure through zero trust frameworks that the internal lateral ability to move is limited across that attack surface. Make sure you have robust incident response plans, playbooks, etc., train, drill, exercise. Make sure that you're ready for those events. Work in third parties into those exercises that Pradeep spoke to earlier, right? And then lastly, I think you've got to maintain situational awareness. Yesterday there was an article that came out that said there's 13 attacks every second against critical infrastructure, not just maritime, but across all sectors. That volume means with our limited resources, we really need to know where to focus defensive efforts on a day-to-day basis, as well as with those strategic resources. So you need to understand and have that situational awareness of that. That will allow you to really focus your resources in a meaningful manner. It's not a one and done with cyber risk management. We're never going to be complete. Perfection is the enemy of progress, right? So we just need to make progress day after day, month after month, year after year. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Scott. And I saw you nodding to those words, Pradeep. Would you like to give also some key advice to organizations and individuals to strengthen their cybersecurity posture in the coming years?
Absolutely. I'll just maybe, since it's getting to the end of the session, I'll revert to some humor. But I remember reading a Dilbert strip many years ago where they call, and I don't mean to call attention to any racism, but they call their Asian employee in and say, "You are now the fire marshal." And he says, "Oh, what does that mean? What do I have to do?" So they tell him, "Well, if there's a fire, you have to roll around in it till it's out." So he says, "But what if it's a really big fire?" He said, "Don't worry, there's no time KPI. You just keep rolling, So the fact of the matter is that we need to really define the problem statements, break them down and define them, and make people accountable for each of these, measure them appropriately, and then we'll start on a path to real resilience. So that's what I would really advise.
Thanks a lot, Pradeep. And as usual, it's about the people. And but nevertheless, Gadi, we are coming back a little bit to the technology part of it. In your opinion, what is the impact of advanced innovative technologies on ports cybersecurity?
Yeah, the innovative technologies that are rising today surely will have a big impact on the port cybersecurity. And for that reason, IAPL Cybersecurity Expert Group, we are planning to develop the new guideline that will be focused on that in the two aspects of advanced technologies. Because in one end, the technologies can help us improve the cybersecurity in ports. For example, AI can help us enhance cyber attack detection and prevention. But there is another aspect. It's that there are new challenges that these technologies will bring, and not only AI. What about alternative fuels? Okay, what attacks or cyber attacks may impact the alternative fuels industry? Okay, so we have to look at all of that, and this is because it's important to implement cybersecurity by design. We don't want to wait 10 years from now that AI was implemented in all the ports and then wake up and say, okay, now we need cybersecurity on top of that. No, let's start and let's think about that now. And I invite anyone that wants to be part of these guidelines to contact me or anyone in IAP Secretariat.
Thanks a lot, Gadi. And thank you very much for your closing statements. And it's, again, has been a remarkable journey today, diving into the complexities of cybersecurity. So thanks a lot. And as we wrap up this episode now, I'd like to extend my special thanks to our speakers for sharing their expertise and valuable insights. So your contributions have greatly enriched our today's discussions. And to you, our audience, thank you very much for tuning in today and being part of this journey. So we appreciate your time and input, and we hope you leave with new ideas, inspiration, and some good ideas for the future. As usual, this session has been recorded and will be made available shortly on the HPC YouTube channel for you. And our next session of Connecting Ports will take place on the 5th of December, focusing on implementing circular economy in the port industry, and we hope to see you again. So please save the date and more information will follow soon. Until then, tschüss and goodbye from Hamburg.